Alina and Daniel S. marriage was the kind people rarely talked about because there was nothing flashy to admire. It didn't sparkle with grand gestures or loud declarations of love. Instead, it existed quietly, stitched together by shared routines and an unspoken understanding that life was something to be endured together. 10 years earlier, they had stood in a modest hall surrounded by family, promising permanence more than passion. Over time, that promise became the backbone of their relationship. They woke up at the same hour, drank their tea in silence, and parted ways each morning with a familiar nod that said more than words ever could. Their home reflected that calm. Everything had a place, not because Alina was obsessive, but because disorder made her uneasy. Daniel noticed these details and respected them, just as Alina respected his need for quiet evenings after long workdays. They didn't argue often. When they did, it was brief and controlled, never spilling into cruelty. Outsiders would have called them distant, but within those walls, there was a sense of safety that neither of them questioned. Family gatherings were another story. Every few weeks, Alina and Daniel would sit across from relatives at long dining tables, smiling at conversations that felt rehearsed. Alina's sister, Rebecca, was always there, watchful, attentive, and just a little too interested in Alina's life. Rebecca laughed loudly, asked pointed questions, and offered advice that sounded helpful but carried a strange edge. Alina brushed it off as concern. After all, Rebecca had always been like that, ever since they were young, competitive, observant, and easily wounded when attention shifted away from her. Rebecca's eyes often lingered on Daniel in ways that made Alina uncomfortable, though she never said anything. It wasn't flirtation. Exactly, but something colder. An assessment. Rebecca noticed how Daniel listened when Alina spoke, how he instinctively reached for her cup when it was empty, how their quiet connection didn't need validation. To Rebecca, it looked like a life she believed should have been hers. Alina never thought her marriage was enviable. She saw it as ordinary, even dull at times. She didn't realize how threatening that ordinariness could be to someone who felt overlooked. Rebecca's own life had unfolded differently: loud beginnings, broken promises, relationships that burned fast and collapsed just as quickly. At family events, she compensated with charm and storytelling, making sure the attention stayed on her. Yet her glances toward Alina were never warm. They carried a silent comparison, a score being kept that Alina didn't know she was part of. Daniel remained polite with Rebecca, unaware of the tension beneath her friendliness. He trusted Alina's family because Alina trusted them. That trust felt natural, inherited, and unquestionable. If someone had told him that danger could come from within that circle, he would have laughed it off. Family, to him, meant safety. It meant people who might annoy you, but would never intentionally harm you. In the evenings, Alina and Daniel often sat together without speaking, the television murmuring in the background. These moments were not empty. They were comfortable. Alina believed this was what long-term love became: less intense, more reliable. She felt secure enough to stop performing happiness and simply exist. Daniel felt the same, though he rarely articulated it. Their marriage didn't demand constant reassurance. It assumed continuity. What Alina didn't see was the quiet resentment growing just beyond her awareness. She didn't notice how Rebecca memorized details about her routine or how carefully she listened when Alina spoke about her marriage, filing away information like tools to be used later. Alina believed the biggest threats to a marriage came from distance, money, or boredom. She never imagined that the calm she valued so deeply would become the very weakness someone else would exploit. By the time the first shadow crossed their peaceful routine, the foundation of their marriage was already being studied from the outside. And while Alina still believed her life was steady and protected, someone close to her had already decided that stability was something she did not deserve. The first crack in Alina and Daniel's marriage didn't arrive with an argument or a confession. It slipped in quietly, disguised as concern. Marcus chose his moment carefully. He didn't show up unannounced or make a dramatic accusation. Instead, he waited until Daniel was alone, catching him outside the house one evening under the pretense of a casual conversation. His tone was hesitant, almost reluctant, as if he were burdened by something he wished he didn't know. Marcus spoke in fragments, never stating anything outright. He mentioned seeing Elena out more often lately, noticing her phone lighting up at odd hours, her distraction during family gatherings. Each comment was delivered gently, framed as worry rather than suspicion. He repeated that he hoped he was wrong, that Daniel deserved honesty, that no man should be kept in the dark. The power of his words lay in what he didn't say. He let Daniel fill in the gaps himself. Daniel laughed at first, dismissing the idea as ridiculous. Elena had always been predictable, steady, almost painfully transparent. But once the seed was planted, it refused to die. That night, Daniel noticed things he had never questioned before. Elena smiling at a message. Elena stepping outside to take a call. None of it was new. Yet suddenly, it all felt different, charged with implication. Marcus's voice echoed in his head, soft but persistent. Over the next few days, Marcus reappeared, always accidentally, always brief. He never pushed. He simply reinforced the doubt, sharing vague observations, reminding Daniel that men were often the last to know the truth. Daniel began watching instead of trusting. He studied Elena's expressions, her tone, her silences. Each neutral moment became evidence. His mind began connecting dots that didn't exist, forming a picture that felt convincing because it hurt. Elena sensed the shift, but couldn't identify its source. Daniel grew distant. His responses clipped, his touch hesitant. Conversations that once flowed easily now felt strained. When she asked if something was wrong, he brushed it off, unwilling to reveal how deeply the doubt had already rooted itself. He didn't want to accuse her without proof, but he also couldn't stop the suspicion from poisoning his thoughts. Marcus understood patience. He knew lies survived best when they were fed slowly. He suggested names without naming them, circumstances without details. He hinted at loyalty and betrayal, making Daniel feel foolish for his trust. Each interaction left Daniel more unsettled than the last. Marcus never appeared malicious. He seemed uncomfortable, even conflicted, which made his words feel more credible. Rebecca stayed in the background, silent but present. She watched the tension grow between Elena and Daniel with careful satisfaction. She never spoke against her sister directly. Instead, she offered sympathy to Daniel, subtle comments about how people changed, how marriage revealed hidden sides. Her involvement was invisible but constant, reinforcing the narrative Marcus had begun. The accusation finally surfaced during a quiet evening that should have been ordinary. Daniel's restraint collapsed under the weight of his imagination. His voice shook as he asked questions that made no sense to Elena. Questions about loyalty, honesty, and respect. When the word affair finally left his mouth, it felt unreal, as though it belonged to someone else's life. Elena stared at him, stunned, unable to comprehend how their calm existence had suddenly turned hostile. She denied everything immediately, her confusion genuine and raw. There was no anger in her response, only disbelief. That hurt Daniel more than shouting would have. He wanted resistance, something solid to push against. Her calm denial only deepened his uncertainty, making him wonder if this was what guilt looked like when it learned to hide. The argument ended without resolution. Daniel withdrew further, emotionally retreating behind a wall of suspicion. Elena was left standing in the ruins of a conversation she never saw coming. She replayed the evening again and again, searching for a mistake she hadn't made. Meanwhile, Marcus stepped back, his job nearly complete. The lie had done what it was designed to do. It had turned trust into doubt and love into something fragile enough to break. By the time the night ended, the marriage was no longer a place of safety. A stranger's words had reshaped reality. And Daniel, once certain of his life, now questioned everything he thought he knew. Suspicion settled into the marriage like a slow, invisible poison. It didn't explode or announce itself. It seeped into every corner of Elena and Daniel's daily life. altering the meaning of even the smallest interactions. Mornings that once passed in comfortable silence now felt tense. Daniel watched more than he spoke. His eyes lingered too long, searching for signs that confirmed the story forming in his mind. Aelina noticed the scrutiny, but couldn't he understand it? She felt examined in her own home, as if she had unknowingly committed a crime. Daniel began questioning details that had never mattered before. Where had she been when she arrived 10 minutes late? Why did her phone stay on silent? Who had she been texting while standing by the window? The questions came casually at first, disguised as conversation, but each one carried an edge. Aelina answered honestly, assuming reassurance would dissolve whatever unease he was feeling. Instead, her openness only seemed to harden his doubts. The more normal her explanations were, the more suspicious they sounded to him. Arguments emerged over trivial things. A misplaced receipt, a changed routine, a canceled plan. Daniel's tone grew sharper, frustration spilling into his words without clear cause. Aelina tried to adapt, becoming more careful, more transparent, as if perfect behavior could restore the balance. She began announcing her movements, explaining herself before being asked, offering details that once belonged to private thought. None of it helped. The gap between them widened, filled with unsaid accusations and exhausted apologies. At night, Daniel lay awake replaying Marcus's insinuations, twisting Aelina's words into something darker. His mind refused rest. He felt betrayed even without proof, angry even without confrontation. That anger made him distant, and that distance made Aelina feel abandoned. She started questioning herself, wondering if she had unknowingly caused this change, if love naturally faded into hostility after enough years together. The emotional withdrawal hurt more than the arguments. Daniel stopped reaching for her hand. He turned away in bed. His laughter disappeared, replaced by a heaviness that filled the room. Aelina mourned the loss quietly, afraid that pushing too hard would drive him further away. She still believed the marriage could be saved, that this was a phase they could work through if she remained patient. When the confrontation finally came, it was brutal in its simplicity. Daniel no longer hid his suspicion. He accused her outright, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. He spoke of betrayal, of humiliation, of feeling like a fool. Aelina listened in shock, each word landing like a blow. The accusation felt surreal, detached from reality, as though someone else's life had been mistaken for hers. She denied everything, not defensively, but desperately. There was nothing to confess, nothing to explain beyond the truth. Her denial wasn't loud or dramatic. It was calm, wounded, and deeply sincere. She expected that sincerity to matter. Instead, Daniel interpreted it as control, as a performance honed by deception. The lie had already rewritten his perception of her. The fight ended without resolution, leaving both of them emotionally shattered. Daniel retreated behind silence, convinced that patience would reveal the truth eventually. Aelina retreated into herself, unsure how to defend against an accusation built on nothing. She felt trapped in a narrative she couldn't escape, punished for an act she never committed. Days passed in strained coexistence. They shared the same space, but lived separate emotional lives. Aelina moved through the house cautiously, aware that every action could be misinterpreted. She felt stripped of dignity, reduced to a suspect under constant observation. The trust she once took for granted was gone, replaced by an invisible trial she was doomed to lose. The marriage, once defined by quiet stability, now felt hostile and unsafe. Love existed, but it was buried beneath resentment and doubt. Aelina realized that suspicion didn't need evidence to destroy something. It only needed repetition. And as the lie continued to echo between them, it reshaped their reality, turning a decade of shared life into something fragile, unstable, and painfully uncertain. The truth did not reveal itself all at once. It surfaced in fragments, small inconsistencies that refused to stay hidden. Aelina began replaying every interaction, every word spoken since the accusation, searching not for her own mistakes, but for the source of the lie. The more she examined the situation, the more she realized that Marcus's involvement felt too deliberate to be random. His concern had been calculated, his timing precise. Someone had guided him. Rebecca's behavior, once dismissed as overbearing affection, began to stand out in a different light. She had been unusually attentive to Daniel in recent weeks, checking in on him, offering sympathy without being asked. Her comments about marriage, loyalty, and disappointment now sounded rehearsed. Elena remembered the subtle glances, the loaded pauses, the way Rebecca never actually defended her when tension surfaced. Instead, she listened, nodded, and allowed doubt to grow. Small clues accumulated. A message on Rebecca's phone that ended abruptly when Elena entered the room. A conversation that stopped mid-sentence. A shared look between Rebecca and Marcus that lasted just a second too long. None of it was enough on its own, but together it formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Elena felt a cold realization settle in her chest. The betrayal hadn't come from outside the family. It had come from within. Confronting Rebecca was not an impulsive decision. Elena waited, watched, and listened, allowing the truth to expose itself. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, stripped of emotion. She asked simple questions, offering Rebecca opportunities to deny, to explain, to retreat. Rebecca did none of those things. Instead, her defensiveness arrived too quickly, her anger too sharp. She accused Elena of paranoia, of insecurity, of trying to shift blame. Under pressure, Rebecca's mask began to crack. Years of buried resentment spilled out in careless words. She spoke of unfairness, of always being second, of watching Elena build a life that seemed effortless while her own fell apart. What Rebecca saw as injustice, Elena had never noticed. She had mistaken silence for peace, distance for acceptance. Rebecca confessed without realizing she was confessing, justifying her actions as deserved correction rather than cruelty. Marcus's role became clear soon after. Faced with evidence and growing suspicion, he admitted that Rebecca had approached him first. She had framed the lie as protection, claiming Elena was hiding something that would eventually hurt Daniel. She appealed to Marcus's sense of loyalty, manipulating his desire to be seen as honest and brave. He had believed he was preventing a disaster, never questioning the story he was given. When Daniel learned the truth, it shattered his certainty. The realization that he had been manipulated by people he trusted cut deeply. His anger shifted from Elena to Rebecca, from suspicion to guilt. He confronted Rebecca, demanding explanations she could no longer control. Her response was bitter rather than remorseful. She claimed she had only accelerated what she believed was inevitable, insisting that Elena's marriage was never as strong as it appeared. The exposure was devastating. Rebecca's carefully constructed narrative collapsed in front of everyone. Family members who had remained neutral were forced to choose sides. The charm and confidence Rebecca relied on no longer protected her. What remained was a woman revealed by her own words, isolated by her refusal to take responsibility. For Elena, the discovery brought no relief. Knowing the truth did not erase the damage. The pain came from understanding that the person who had watched her grow up, who had shared her childhood, had deliberately dismantled her life. Rebecca hadn't acted in a moment of anger. She had planned, waited, and executed her betrayal with patience. The sister Elena thought she knew no longer existed. In her place stood someone capable of calculated harm, someone who believed envy justified destruction. That realization was more painful than the accusation itself. The lie had wounded her marriage, but the truth severed her family bond permanently. The truth arrived too late to prevent the damage, but it came with a force that could no longer be ignored. Messages were uncovered, timelines unraveled, and the story Rebecca had constructed fell apart under its own weight. What once sounded like coincidence now revealed intent. Daniel saw clearly how every doubt he had been fed was placed there deliberately. The realization didn't bring relief. It brought shame. He had doubted the woman who had never given him a reason to question her. Daniel's apology was immediate but imperfect. Words tumbled out in fragments, heavy with regret and self-reproach. He admitted how easily he had been swayed, how fear had overridden trust, Elena listened, without interruption. Her expression calm but distant. She accepted his apology, not because the pain had faded, but because holding onto anger felt heavier than letting it go. Forgiveness did not restore what had been lost. It simply allowed the conversation to continue. Rebecca's exposure changed everything. Family members who once admired her confidence now viewed her with suspicion. Her explanations sounded hollow, her justifications selfish. When confronted, she alternated between denial and defiance, unable to accept responsibility for the consequences of her actions. The more she spoke, the more isolated she became. Eventually, the attention she once craved turned into judgment she could not escape. Elena did not seek revenge in the way Rebecca expected. There were no public confrontations, no dramatic accusations. Instead, Elena withdrew. She stopped answering messages, declined invitations, and removed herself quietly from Rebecca's life. The silence was deliberate and absolute, where anger might have allowed reconciliation. Indifference left no opening. Rebecca was forced to sit with the outcome of her choices without the comfort of conflict. The marriage, though saved from collapse, was forever altered. Elena and Daniel rebuilt slowly, cautiously, aware that trust once broken does not return easily. Conversations became more honest, but also more guarded. Daniel learned that certainty was fragile and that doubt, once introduced, could never be fully erased. Elena learned that loyalty must be chosen daily, not assumed because of history or blood. Their home regained its quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It carried awareness rather than innocence. Elena no longer mistook stability for safety. She understood now that peace required boundaries, and that love did not excuse betrayal. Daniel respected those boundaries, recognizing that his role in the destruction, though manipulated, was real. Rebecca faded from their lives, her presence reduced to memory and cautionary thought. Without Elena to compete with or hurt, her bitterness turned inward. The family dynamic shifted permanently, leaving fractures that time would not easily mend. Some relationships survived, others dissolved quietly, with no ceremony or explanation. Elena moved forward without triumph or satisfaction. Revenge, she discovered, was not about punishment but about preservation. By choosing herself, she reclaimed control over a narrative that had been stolen from her. She no longer needed validation from those who had wronged her. Her strength lay in continuing without them. In the end, the lie that had been meant to destroy her became the moment she learned clarity. Trust was no longer blind. Love was no longer passive. And family, she understood, was defined not by blood, but by those who chose not to harm you when they had the chance.